Okay, should we get back to it now? So Durkheim's case, when looking at suicide, was that modern societies are societies in which the tempo of change increases, anomie increases, consequently anomic suicide increases. Modern societies are also societies of fragmentation, individualism. Egoism increases, egoistic suicide increases. Therefore, Durkheim's case towards the close of the book Suicide is that increasing rates of suicide are in fact a normal fact of modern life. And they're to be explained socially, not be explained by reference to biological degeneracy, which was the dominant response to it at the close of the 20th century. Suicide is a social fact which has received a a social explanation, Durkheim argues. In the book of 1893, The Division of Labour in Society, Durkheim has very little to say about crime, though he does, towards the close of the book, engage with criminal justice. But really it's a book which sets out Durkheim's main concerns throughout his writing career, which is to set out the dynamics and processes of social change, the way in which societies transform themselves, and in particular the movement from pre-modern to the modern world. So the book amounts to a substantial degree a series of contrasts between the characteristics of modern society and pre-modern society. He firstly argues that societies are to be distinguished by what he refers to as their division of labour. Here he distinguishes between two kinds of division of labour, and therefore two types of society. A mechanical division of labour, as he puts it, or mechanical society, which refers to the pre-modern type, and the organic division of labour, organic societies, which refer to modern societies. In mechanical or pre-modern societies, the division of labour is relatively simple. People in these societies have very similar experiences one to the other. They perform very simple tasks. They have very similar customs and beliefs. And these beliefs are typically religious in their form. On the other hand, modern societies, or what he terms organic societies, are societies with more complex division of labour, greater difference or heterogeneity in terms of people's experience, their customs, their beliefs, their work, and so on and so forth. In other words, the distinction is between a socially homogeneous society and modern organic societies which are socially heterogeneous, emphasizing the difference. He then argues that all societies possess what he refers to as a collective conscience, or conscience collective. What does Durkheim mean by a collective conscience? At its most general, it means what Durkheim refers to as the psychic life of society. The psychic life of society. By that, quite simply, he means that all societies must possess a set of beliefs, a set of values, a set of norms governing our behaviour, all of which are embodied in social organisations making up that society, and into which we are socialised as we grow up, into those norms, values, beliefs, and so on and so forth. In other words, the conscience collective fundamentally regulates and shapes individual behavior. The collective conscience, he argues, is a powerful objective force over individuals, and it is in part crystallized in the law. And it is necessary to maintain social order, to hold societies together. Provides the means of social solidarity. Shared set of beliefs, customs, practices, morality, norms that allows us to talk about something called a society. Without it, Durkheim contends, and quite right, there would be no such thing as society. There would be nothing to hold us together. In pre-modern societies, Durkheim's case is, in mechanical societies, the collective conscience in these societies is typically religious, it is typically extensive. In other words, it regulates people's lives in almost every particular way. Nothing is, in a sense, beyond the regulation of the collective conscience. It fixes people in a social hierarchy and regulates lives very rigidly. In these societies, the collective conscience is also very intensive. The core beliefs of that society are held to very strongly and fervently. And therefore very strongly and fervently enforced. In modern societies, however, in organic societies, the collective conscience is less extensive. Another way of putting it is modern societies are more individualistic. There's a greater degree of individual freedom. These are societies of greater heterogeneity. There's no assumption in the modern world that we all hold on to exactly the same set of beliefs. We live in a more cosmopolitan world. And in such a society, Durkheim argues, order is maintained primarily through the law, not religion. And the law of modern societies must recognize individual difference, not try to enforce uniformity, as the religious world had. So Durkheim's case is that mechanical and organic societies are social facts, and they produce specific kinds of collective conscience, mechanical and organic, extensive, intensive versus less extensive, less intensive, as social facts. And in so doing, produce very different legal systems or responses to crime. Now let's look in the first instance to the different ways in which they respond to crime for Durkheim. Mechanical societies, with their extensive and intensive collective conscience, produce, Durkheim argues, repressive legal systems. Repressive law and repressive legal systems. Those societies, as I said, have a collective conscience which regulates social life and individual behaviour in every particular way. These are societies in which there's the expectation that everybody will adhere to a common set of values, uniform, homogeneous set of values. And this is reflected in the fact that responses to crime are generally highly repressive in such societies. And this is testimony to just how fervently, strongly, intensively the collective conscience held to. And typically, the response to crime in such societies is one that involves the ritual of physical pain. Public execution, public mutilation, the ritual of bodily punishment that is at once both savage and very ritualistic. From the public execution of the scaffold, the beheading, the stoning, the taking away of limbs, hang drawing and quartering. These are all indications, examples of repressive laws which belong in mechanical societies with their extensive, intensive collective consciences. In other words, repressive laws are created by extensive, intensive collective conscience, which are in turn created by societies of a simple division of labour, mechanical. On the other hand, organic societies, where the collective conscience is less extensive and intensive, where there is greater heterogeneity and individualism, the collective conscience is not so important. It doesn't regulate your lives so completely. Because these are societies of difference, there's not the same expectation that we'll all believe in the same set of values. These societies produce, naturally his argument is, restitutive law or restitutive legal systems. And these are systems of law and legal systems which are aimed simply at restoring order between individuals. These are systems of law which are intended to maintain individual freedom as much as possible, but ensure that freedom is exercised in a regular way that takes regard of the community as a whole. In other words, these are legal systems which recognise individualism, individual rights, human rights, and so on and so forth. So in other words, even at its most general, it's only with modern organic societies that you get the emergence of things such as human rights. Human rights pertain to the individual, and in these societies, Durkheim argues, there is no such thing as the individual, because we are all homogeneous, we all have the same experiences, we are held together by a uniform, homogeneous, fervently held idea of the social order. Most clearly seen, for example, amongst certain Hindu communities, the tradition whereby on the death of the husband, the wife should take her own life. In other words, the wife's life, her identity, her rights, are entirely dictated by a place in the social hierarchy, in a relation to her husband. And in the face of that, the wife has no sense of human rights. But this is replicated in society after society after society. So, what he's arguing, therefore, is the social fact of mechanical societies produces repressive law. The social fact of organic societies must produce restitutive law as its natural legal system. Durkheim then goes on to observe, towards the close of the division of labour society, that crime, he argues, is universal. And not only is it universal, it in fact performs an important social function for society. In all societies, it allows, through the ritual of trial and punishment, it allows for the celebration of the collective conscience, or that which holds us together, those common values that hold us together. In other words, crime is good for society inasmuch as it allows for the offender to be tried and therefore punished publicly, and in so doing it allows society to celebrate the idea of that society, the community, the values, the collective conscience that exists within that community. So it is a key and important feature of the world, ironically, that it allows the celebration of the collective conscience. As regards the fact that crime has been increasing through the 19th century, as indisputably it had, he argues that increasing rates of crime are simply the normal result of modernizing societies. Why? Modernization stimulates crime, he argues, in the same way that it increases rates of suicide. Because modernization increases the currents of egoism and I know me. Crime will increase, Durkheim argues, where traditional norms and values are eroded, become anomic, and this is the case in the modern world increasingly. And crime will increase in the modern world also because the modern world is increasingly egoistic, individualistic, self-seeking. Comes with the territory. In other words, Durkheim's argument is that increasing levels of crime is a price we pay for an increasingly vibrant, modernizing world, and it is the price we pay for a world that prizes individual freedom. So in other words, the normality of higher levels of crime is a result of the fact that modern societies are more egoistic and anomic. They are societies of individual freedom, individual striving, and they are societies of constant change. You can't have a modern, vibrant society without, Durkheim argues, relatively higher levels of crime.
Okay. We've seen like two types of society, and the other one is repressive, and I would imagine that that's the traditional way. So if we're saying that because we're moving from the traditional way, and that's why crime is rising. So, and then we do also like the freedom of the modern society. How, I don't understand how is it going to work now, because it's like there's a conflict there.
Sorry, can we have quiet, please? Sorry.
There's a conflict there of interest, kind of, because...
Why? Why is the conflict?
Because the increase in crime rate is due to the erosion of the traditional way, which I would imagine is more like the collective conscious kind of way.
Yes.
And then the modern way that we are living now, which I believe, which I enjoy as well, more freedom and everything, is increasing crime. So now, where do we find it? Because nobody wants to go back, but we see that that's the best way, but it's also repressive and all that. So where do we find the balance now?
Well, we find a balance in recognizing that we simply have to live with higher levels of crime than we did in the pre-modern world. It's a price we pay for everything that comes with the modern world, all the good things we enjoy about the modern world. Yeah?
Okay.
But really, it's a warning. What he's saying is, we cannot, and he's arguing in the context of the late 19th century against people who want to drag Europe back into a pre-modern world to fight crime, to be more repressive. He argues that if you try and do that, what you do is you impose on modern societies a system of laws which is entirely unsuited to it. And a system of laws which will fundamentally conflict with your basic premises and values of the modern world, which is liberal, tolerant, heterogeneous, individualistic, striving, ambitious world. And his argument is the repressive laws have no place in such a world. And his argument is that the way in which you address the problem of crime is two things. One, you address it through strategies. Sorry? Somebody talking?
Sorry.
Or is it voices in my head?
Sorry, no. Sorry, Dave.
Strategies of rehabilitation to try and restore people to cooperative living, and through strategies of attempting to increase the sense of shared values, collective consciousness of the modern world. His argument is you can't do that through religion. Religion belongs to the past, his argument is. Right? You cannot depend upon the priest to do that. You cannot depend upon religion to do that, because that belongs to the past, because it attempts to impose a uniform set of values on you. The only way you can do it, the way that Durkheim recommends you do it, is through public institutions. And there are two such public institutions. One is education. And education occupies a role, his argument is, not only to pass on skills to the younger generation, but also to pass on appropriate values that will bring them up to act in responsible ways. Yeah? So, for example, at one point Durkheim refers to the teacher, the school teacher, as the modern secular priest. Not only there to teach, to educate people about skills, he's there as a moral teacher as well. A secular moral teacher. Yeah? And secondly, the importance of welfare. Welfare systems are important for Durkheim not only because they support people, but they give people a sense that that society respects them. And his argument is that if you give people a sense of society respecting you, then you are more or less to invest in that society. You'll be brought into the community. You see what I mean? But he still argues that you will get higher rates of crime in the modern world. That is indisputably the case. But he says, you've just got to make the choice. Do you want a free, liberal, dynamic, vibrant, cosmopolitan society that respects individual rights, human rights, and all the rest of it? If you do, then with that territory comes relatively higher levels of crime. If you attempt to foist in that society repressive legal systems, you will be attempting to drag that society back into the pre-modern world. And that would be entirely useless. You would eclipse modern ideas of rights and so on and so on. Yeah? Yeah? So in other words, higher rates of crime are a price we pay, he argues, for higher levels of individual freedom and social vibrancy. It's a necessary part of a more tolerant, a more vibrant, and a more liberal world. The absence of crime, or rapid falls, for example, in levels of crime in the modern world, would be indications that society is stagnating, is less vibrant than it should be, and a more repressive social order. So in other words, increased levels of crime are intrinsic to more dynamic societies. In other words, higher levels of crime in the modern world are simply a normal product of normal modern life. Higher levels of crime as a social fact are to be explained by the key characteristics of the modern world as social facts, that they produce higher levels of egoism and higher levels of anomie. Moreover, Durkheim's case is that the criminal may be seen as functional to society in another sense. And this is because the criminal and higher rates of criminality are frequently signs of the need for social reform, for change. And this is where Durkheim introduces the idea of the functional criminal, or the functional rebel. In a society where individuals are brought up, are socialized, to inspire, to improve themselves, which is certainly the case in the modern world. But where there exist obstacles that prevent those individuals from improving themselves, poverty, prejudice, poor education, and so on and so forth, then Durkheim's argument is crime will grow excessively high. And this, in turn, indicates the need for that society to address those problems that block people from achieving what they wish to aspire to. It should cause that society to address problems of prejudice, problems of poverty, problems of poor education. that prevent aspiring individuals from achieving that which they aspire to. In other words, indications of the need to address obstacles to people achieving what they aspire to. Because the modern world is again, it's a world of aspiration. Whereas in pre-modern societies, your social status was largely fixed, determined by what your parents did, and that was justified in turn, frequently by reference to God. In the modern world, we live in a world where we're brought up to aspire to improve ourselves. We are desiring, aspiring subjects. And where we are brought up to do this, where obstacles are placed in front of us systematically, then this is fertile ground for the growth of crime. Because people believe they are being denied that which they legitimately deserve, which is to achieve what they have the ability to achieve. And how does he propose we respond to this? Firstly, through two strategies. Amelioration, or to address the social conditions to overcome what he refers to as the forced division of labour, society where there are obstacles to individual aspiration. This is the role of modern welfare states, to facilitate people being able to achieve that which they aspire to, that which they deserve. So Durkheim was a great proponent of social welfare. And secondly, systems of justice which hang upon the idea of rehabilitation. In other words, to restore individuals to voluntary cooperation with others. Therapy, therefore, becomes one of the justifications of punishment. Rehabilitative works with no defense. So, if you like, this should address the reasons why people offend in the first place, excessively. If you remove the forced division of labour by addressing the obstacles to people's achieving that which they regard as their rights, address issues of poverty, inequality, prejudice, racism, and so on and so forth, then you thereby address those problems which create the forced division of labour, which in turn create excessively high rates of crime. You prevent, in other words, you undermine excessively high rates of offending. And secondly, rehabilitation to address those people who still do offend. But rehabilitation rests upon the idea that you're restoring individuals to voluntary cooperation. Any questions? No questions?
Yeah, I've got one there.
Sorry.
I'm actually thinking about how to ask the question, so you might have to jump in. If there are all these theories which are recognised as an understanding of why people commit crime, and they're very deep and in depth, it goes through psychological, society, everything, and it comes together. Our question is quite simple. Why do we then penalise people for committing these things up? We understand why they do it. We lock them up. You talk about therapy, but if somebody robs a bank and we understand the reasoning behind why that person may have robbed that bank, although there are all these theories, we're still going to lock them up. And, you know.
Well, the first response to that is that criminal justice systems are not run by criminologists. They're run by politicians. And politicians are really, essentially, concerned to attain power and to govern. Yeah? And they They make decisions based upon that. So one of the things that politicians have come to realise over the last 20 or 30 years is that there's a lot of votes to be won in getting tough on offenders. People want to hear, basically, that you're going to get tough on offenders. The politician who says that is the politician who wins votes, generally. Yeah? So in other words, it's very likely that the politicians of this country is going to ignore much of the evidence. And they do so. They do so elsewhere, not just in this country, but elsewhere as well. But secondly, as is the case in the humanities more generally, you have competing approaches to understanding crime. That there is no common agreement. All you've got to do is go and look along the shelves of the criminology books in the library, and you'll realise that there's huge differences in argument amongst criminologists about the way forward, about how to understand this thing, how to deal with this thing. But that's just a characteristic of the humanities. There is no quick sort of magic bullet, as it were.
Okay, so how can we as criminologists have a positive impact on that? We're not politicians, we're not the decision makers. What is it that we can do to help?
Well, I mean, you can. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you can do as criminologists who graduated from here have done before. You can work in sectors of the criminal justice system that allows you freedom, discretion to use your knowledge in particular kinds of ways. And to recognise that even though, politicians set the parameters of policy and so on and so forth, there is always room within those parameters for discretion to be exercised. Yeah? But, my object here in this unit is simply to introduce you to a series of what have been the most influential approaches to crime of the 20th and early 21st century. Yeah? Intellectually influential. In a sense, in this unit, I'm not really concerned with policy. Absolutely not concerned with it. I'm just concerned with the theory. Yeah? And elsewhere you will then go on to look about the ways in which some of these ideas have been or could be applied in the context of criminal justice. Yeah? Any other questions? Yeah?
I'm just going to figure out how to put this question as well in a way, so much to say. Regardless of what the policy is, or we said that we have less rehabilitation of justice.
Sorry?
Rehabilitation, right? Rehabilitation people.
Sorry, I didn't hear. We have what people?
Rehabilitation.
Yeah, rehabilitative, yeah.
Of people. We said that when we make that reporting and address the issues, i.e. poverty or given on the society where the diversity exists, to me, it just doesn't really matter because when the politicians say such a thing, they know that by removing those things, it's going to influence people to commit crime. By committing crime, then we come into the conclusion that we have to restore those individuals.
Sorry, I can't hear, but people making a noise. It's background noise.
But by removing those forces, people are going to commit more crimes, which is that's what the theory says. Is that right?
Removing what forces?
Like, giving people more rights as an individual, addressing the issues like poverty or education.
Well, no, all I said was that the modern world, as the argument goes, the modern world is a diverse, vibrant, rapidly changing, individualistic world in which we're brought up to aspire to improve ourselves. That's all I'm saying, and that's what Durkheim is saying, and in such a world, we must expect to find relatively higher rates of crime. That's all I'm saying. Yeah?
Yes, I understand that. But the thing is, then instead of penalizing as a big social aspect, then we try to penalize for individuals trying to rehabilitate them, trying to educate them.
Yeah.
And trying to find a way that they accept what they've done is wrong. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because to me, it's just like in the 18th century. It's all about power. When people create those issues, create these policies to help in one hand, they know that the crime is going to become higher. Then, therefore, they can keep the power by criminalizing each individual. As you said, our criminal justice is run by politicians.
Well, yes, but I mean, I would rather have a criminal justice system governed by politicians who are in positions of authority because they have been elected to those positions of authority, than politicians who are in positions of authority because they inherited that role, because God says that they should occupy that role, and so on and so forth. I'd rather deal with politicians and administrators who have been brought up in a relatively enlightened world, yes, open to all these kinds of explanations, than in a pre-modern world where even mentioning these explanations may result in where these explanations were not available.
But is it true to say that they create this kind of atmosphere by knowingly just to keep their power on? When they do these policies, they know that it's going to affect certain area, and they know that that pressure is going to explode more crime in that certain area. So therefore, by bringing another policy, so basically they're giving in for one hand, thinking...
We're way ahead of this thing now. I mean, how does this relate to Durkheim?
It's because it says that social conditions, it affects people.
Yes.
Right?
So Durkheim's argument is that if you want to deal with crime, you must recognise it's a social fact. The modern world is a world in which the forced division of labour may exist. What you've got to do is address those factors which create the forced division of labour. Obstacles to opportunity.
So when we address those, then the crime rate will get higher.
No. What his argument is, if you address those, then you will make inroads into the rate of crime. It's much the same as in a more contemporary sense when psychologists talk about crime or something like that. They talk about the problem of relative deprivation. Yeah? In other words, crime results from situations in which people feel a sense of grievance at being denied what they legitimately deserve. What they've been brought up to expect that they can achieve if they put the effort in and have a chance to. So crime doesn't result from poverty. Crime results from people being locked into a situation where on the one hand they're being told they can aspire, they can achieve if they've got the talent and if they've got the energy and commitment, but then they find themselves up against obstacles to achievement. And in such situations, Durkheim's argument is you will get excessively high rates of crime. You can remove those obstacles and those excessively high rates of crime will decline. It won't eliminate crime, but it will reduce damage. But crime remains something that we have to live with. Okay. Thank you. I'll see you across in... Where are we going? Sorry? What room? What room is it? Oh, my room. What room do we be in?
L216, next to the library.
216?
Yeah, 3 of them. I looked. Katrina, what room are we in next? What's the room? 261.
I've got laptop as well. See you later.
Can you pass me that?
Yeah?
Send it.
Oh, it takes a long time, and it depends on how much memory you have.
I've got quite a lot.